You're tuned into the Edible Activist Podcast. I am your host and favorite go-to edible activist, Melissa L. Jones. On this show, we serve up empowering narratives and fresh perspectives straight from the voices of emerging Black people and people of color in agriculture and business. And in these candid conversations, we might sprinkle in a few choice words. They're the ones stewarding the land, healing communities, and championing food justice and economic empowerment across the country. Their contributions and stories sprouted from the earth truly embody the spirit of activism in their own unique, edible ways. So let's dig in and get started. Peace and welcome to the Edible Activist Podcast. I am your host and favorite edible activist, Melissa L. Jones. I am so honored to have a very special returning guest, another returning guest with me here on today's show. She's so many things, and I like to use that term, so many things, but she is so many things. Brittney Drakeford, she is a community planner by profession, a sixth generation Prince George's County native, a grower. She's been on my show before, even if she doesn't grow now. She did grow. We'll tap into that. And also one of the founders of the Capital Market, a scholar, PhD candidate, and again, so many things.
Thank you.
I don't know what else can I say, but Brittney, welcome back.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you today and super honored just by your words. So thank you for allowing me to come back and for us to have an awesome conversation about land, food, and some of the different policies that really impact people of color.
I have so much excitement because I've always wanted to. Well, first of all, let me say this. Brittney was on my show pre-pandemic. Mm-hmm. That's when you were at the Cottage City
yep. Oh, wow.
Community Garden. Mm-hmm. I was out there in the garden with her. We have some very beautiful, vivid photos of her and peppers. I remember I was working with X on a fish pepper project. Right. Brittney was part of it. Every time I've been in Brittney's space, she's a natural educator. Literally, she's a natural educator, teacher. And so I've always learned from her. I think it was episode number 35.
Oh, wow.
I think this might make Charge My Head, Not My Heart 156 or 157, one of those.
Wait, when you say 150, you mean 100?
100, yeah. In the hundreds.
Okay,
yes.
We're going to build these archives. We're going to build some archives. So any other archivists out there, okay, we are going to be building the Edible Activist Archives.
Yes.
And we're going to, because this 157?
Yes.
That is a blessing.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I'm pushing towards 200. I feel like when I get to that 200, I'll feel damn, but we're going to celebrate the 150s. Yes. So just to see how far, I'm pretty sure it's episode 35.
Wow.
Skipping to in the hundreds.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is an honor to have you back. I'm super excited. We are going to be talking about heirs property. And no better person, no better scholar, no better educator than Miss Brittney, who I said, listen, I think I had reposted something. I think I have to shout out Duran Chavis out in Richmond because he has a lot to say about the food system, land, heirs property. Right. And I think I had reposted something and the beautiful Ashley, the other half, or the other third rather, of the Capital Market said, Brittney, get Brittney back on the show. I said, oh, say less. So I'm just really excited because we've never had an intentional discussion around heirs property. We've had some conversations, generally on this show about family land and the ugly dynamics behind family land. But, and there's so many dynamics, right? But we never specifically talked about heirs property. And Brittney has some significant personal experiences with property, but also in her background of, being a planner, community planner, urban planner, and just understanding like literally the landscape and how our land was built and, in so many ways that just didn't serve Black people.
Right.
Like she has all those perspectives that I know she's going to bring together. I'm not going to even listen, if y'all want to learn more about Brittney, come have tea with us another time, but we about to dive in, okay? Because this is hefty. Unless, Brittney, there's some things you want to kick off before we go in,
Yeah, I mean, I think just ultimately the discussion around heirs property is fundamentally like a discussion around memory, legacy, and ways that we can use in our connecting time, space, and geography in one time. And so I think for Black people, right, who are like the founders of everything, right? The founders of architecture, the founders of agriculture. It's important for us to hold that it is not that our practices and customs are wrong or faulty, but that we are like transitioning those into systems that have not been designed for us. And so when we look at land loss in the United States as a result of heirs property or the weaponization of other types of policy around land, it is not because of us, but because of these systems. So I think that's just like one of the biggest things.
Thank you for grounding us and reminding us because we need that. All right. So, Brittney, for those who might not be familiar, what exactly is heirs property?
Yeah, so heirs property is wait. Also, I'm going to note, at the last time I was here, I told you about how I had to write reports all the time.
Yes.
So if you all were here in the studio with us, imagine I have one of my reports that I have written in preparation for our discussion today. So
Brittney has this is why I love Brittney. She gonna come prepared. Brittney got like papers just like sprawled across this table, like true academic. But she gonna bring the facts.
And I'm trying to make sure I get them right. So I think first, right, when we think about heirs property, it's important for us to understand just a few components. So in the 1900s, early 1900s, there were about 15 million acres of rural land owned by African Americans in the United States. By the early 2000s, that number dwindled down to about 2 million acres of rural land. And so Black landholders have seen more than anywhere between 80 to 90% of reduction in farmland owned by African Americans over this past century. And, mathematically, financially, that equates to about $18 billion of wealth that has been removed from the Black community when we just think about the price of that land valuation. So essentially, I mean, that's just some of the context, right? So that's, of course, not defining what heirs property is, but just the context of what the ramifications are when we think about land loss, Black families, and again, different types of weaponizations of political and government systems. So heirs property is essentially undivided, inherited land that is owned by two or more people. This land is often owned by descendants or descendants, and it can be either in rural areas or urban areas. And then more frequently, there's a term being used called tangled titles, which is more frequently being used in urban communities, where it still talks about the same concept. So we think about heirs property in rural land, tangled titles. If you say your grandmother has, when they say don't sell grandmama's townhouse or row house, right? Oftentimes it's the same process that happens, right? You have somebody owns a house, that individual passes away, they don't have a will. There's no like formal record. So that entire house just transfers to whoever else are there, essentially their next of kin. So the USDA defines heirs property as family-owned land that is jointly owned by descendants of a deceased person whose estate did not clear probate, where probate is essentially the administration of a deceased person's will or estate. So if you don't have a will, you don't have a estate, typically if you own any kind of property, it will then be classified as heirs property. But I wanted to also highlight this quote from Brenda Gibson, who's an associate professor of legal writing at Wake Forest University. And she describes heirs property as a more of a product of the deeply entrenched racial caste system of a racist governmental processes and laws that have militated against Black land ownership and wealth, right? So when we think about heirs property, effectively, it is that you or your siblings or your aunts or your uncles or your parents have inherited some land because someone passed away, and you all own it collectively together. That means you don't own one part, auntie doesn't own that part, and you all own that entire piece
Together.
of land together at one time, right? So you all own it, and you all share any kind of interest. If you grow something, whatever interest you all share that together right? That's effectively what heirs property is.
Okay. Understanding that you're not a lawyer. Did you ever want to go to law school, though?
So actually, I have, because you asked me earlier, what do I want to do next? I was like, I might go to law school. Thinking like, this would be fun, right?
It's fitting, educator, lawyer, historian.
I was really thinking that. Yeah. But because effectively with urban planning, I'm working in property law, even if not necessarily from the law side, but I have to review law, I have to review policy. I'm looking at tax records, I'm looking at all those things. So it is something, yeah.
Oh, goodness gracious. All righty. So, but okay, understanding that technically legal, like you don't have a law degree,
Right.
But, and we're going to get into some of your personal experiences, but can you briefly speak to some of the legal and social implications to heirs property? You touched on it without touching on it, and that when it's passed down, it's collectively, y'all, you own it together, but then it gets tricky.
Yeah. So I say
and sticky.
It is, right? Because you're dealing with cousins, you're dealing with family, kin. Sometimes you don't know who kin is, right? Who is the person?
Right.
Who is my uncle's? Who are my uncle's children?
Yes.
Who also hold claim to this land, right? So I would say inherently, right, like the concept of heirs properties, I would see it. It's not necessarily bad, right? Theoretically, you have this concept where you have land that is generational. In some instances, some scholars or some academics will say that it actually reflects the importance and centrality of kin for African people or African or Black communities, right? So if we were can you imagine you all, everybody is living on this one piece of land that my great grandmother owned or my great grandfather owned, and Sally, I'm making up family names here.
Yeah.
Sally, you own this land and you can stay here as long as you need it. Greg, you can be here, right? So essentially this idea of heirs property is not inherently bad.
Yeah, no.
But when we think about the weaponization or how policies are racist in the United States and how it rolls out, it becomes that, right? So effectively, some of the biggest issues or the biggest risks that we see with not tax sales, but heirs property are loss of land due to partition sales. A partition sale is essentially where, let me take a step back. Because this land is commonly owned, that means that everybody has the same amount of rights and same amount of access of what can happen with that land. Also, if you ever want to sell the land or if you wanted to do certain types of development that you might need a clear title for, maybe you're trying to get certain types of loans to do reinvestment in the property, one of the biggest things that you need is a clear title. But heirs property is, it becomes conflicted in a way because you might have multiple people who aren't on the title, but who hold right and claim to that property. So I'll give you an example. So my grandmother, actually my grandmother's father owned maybe about 150 acres of land in South Carolina. Upon his passing, he did not have a will. So his land was divided up between his children.
How many kids did he?
I'm gonna go with 8.
Ooh,
7,
yeah,
8. So
yeah.
so the land was divided between his children, and then some of the land actually had to get sold because they went to court to actually pay for court costs and all those things.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay.
So my grandmother inherits about 13 acres of land. So my grandmother passes away. But before she passes away, my father and his siblings, they do what's called like a quick deed. So they basically quickly transition the land into a quick title deed is what it's referred to.
Okay.
So they quickly transition all of her existing deed from that initial partition sale to themselves. And so now we have 5 people who are on a deed to own this land.
Okay.
My uncle Ernest passes away in 2014. So when he passes away, he now has 3 children, right? Who now also own 1/3. Each of them own or have 1/3 of 1/5 of an interest in that one piece of land.
Wow.
right?
And he was one of the 5 on the deed.
He was one of the 5 on the deed.
But his kids aren't on that deed, but they still have an interest because they are okay.
Exactly. So they still have an interest. So when we think about just like what some of the risks that come from that, right? So now there are more court costs that we have to like figure out how do you clear up this title? How do you clear up the deed to make sure that that happens? How do you notify people in case you have family members where maybe his children we aren't able to get in contact with, right? So that's just one of the challenges with partition sales. We also see challenges with just like like I said, you're ineligible for loans or grants or funding. So we have 13 acres of land that we would love to redevelop, right? But you can't redevelop that land. You can't even sell the land until you have a clean title, clean deed, unless it's through court order. And that court order typically happens through a partition sale.
And so a quick deed is not a clean deed, not necessarily.
So it's not necessarily a clean deed. One, in this instance, because there were 5 people on it.
Yeah.
And then once someone passed away, now you have entered into he passed away without a will. His estate needs to be probated. Some instances, even in the case of having to probate his estate, you have a time limit that is required to maybe go through an administrative process to do probate. Probate is essentially when you identify and determine what people's assets are upon their death. So it's like, all right, well, now you have this very confusing situation. In our case, there are 8 people now who hold claim to this land, right? So there's 7, excuse me, not 8. There's 7 people who hold claim to this land, and each of them can do legally whatever they want on that land without permission from someone else, because that's just the way that the law works for what's referred to as like tenancy in common.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay. This is so a blessing to have a big family, right? But, and I don't want to say but, and it's great, right?
Yeah.
So you have like this large family. And I think that's part of how it can get tricky. I'm sure there are other ways it can get tricky, even with a smaller family, right? But especially when, like, I come from a very large family. So, very, not that this is all about me, but I'm sharing my story. I think I've actually talked about this, and I had Filani in a show. There's some land, so my family have some land in Mississippi, right? I was told, Brittney, that I could have this piece of land. It was literally, I don't even know if it was an acre, but it was significant for me. It holds a lot of significance because my grandfather, sharecropper, right? Great-grandfather, sharecropper, and my family grew up in this very small country town where my family used to, have other, land. So I was told I was going to be given this land, and I was like, I need this on paper. I appreciate your kind words, but I need it on paper. So fast forward, he retracts back and says, you know what, I'm going to keep it in the family, which kind of hurt me. I was just like, I am family, but I get it. I guess he meant like his unit, right? So don't start inquiring about land, y'all, because then people gonna make some phone calls and then you out to get the land. It can just get very messy, which
very
I'm
quickly.
very quickly. And so I felt like now I was kind of the bad one, you know, because they were like, oh, she's trying to get the land. I was like, no, I was told that this was going to be given to me, but I needed this to be a formal process.
Right.
We need to go down to the courthouse, like, you know. So anyway, long story short, he has kids that don't even live, from to my knowledge. Like some of them, like two of them live in Mississippi. There's some others that don't. And so they would all also have to, like, well, not right now, but like they had say so about him giving me the land. It was like 4 or 5 of them or something to my memory. And so I was like, you know what, y'all, don't forget about it. Like,
Right. Exactly.
just forget about it. But I come from a large family, and so even, you know, he's my cousin who's still living, you know, whenever he transitions on, and I'm not trying to affirm that, but I'm just saying, like, he still has he has kids who also need to make, and they have kids.
Right.
And probably some of their kids have kids. So it's like this very, this tree.
Yeah,
and these branches, and, you know, so.
Yeah. I mean, so in the United States, right, property rights is very much tied to like a family. And one of the first things that it's tied to family. And for me, it gets exciting because you can't talk about land in the United States without talking about familiar connections, ties.
Right.
And you also have to talk about, like, you know, property enslavement and those impacts, right? And so one of the first things that I always tell people when I'm helping them either with some genealogical research, or if we're just like working on things like, how do I figure out this land? It's like, you need to actually sit down and start building out your family tree. Because having your family tree, because that then is what you use to validate, right, your claim to it, right? So we had an issue in our family about, do certain people still hold claim to something, even if maybe their parents did not pay into it?
Oh.
And so the conversation that I said is like the beauty of, and this is like the conflicted part of heirs property, right? The beauty of it is that you hold right to something merely because an ancestor, whether it be a grandmother, grandfather, great, whatever, however far back, had a belief that they wanted to have something for future generations, right? And so
That's the point.
Merely by your birth, right?
Your birthright.
You own something, right? Like merely by you being born to the family, the parents, or whomever, you now have ownership over something. And it's not just like, it's because somebody else said, I am going to invest in this piece of property. I'm going to invest in ensuring that there is a future, right? So I often, whenever I talk about planning and I'm going back and forth between planning, land, I'm like, it is an act of hope, right? And even though the situations can be stressful, right?
Don't feel like hope.
Y'all are stressing
may
me
not see
out.
hope, right?
If my father don't sit down and listen to me, right? And, you know, like, but it's this act of hope and future visioning that there's going to be a place, right, for us in the future, and us being our family, us being Black people in the future. Yeah. And so then the thing that we have to figure out in 21st century, 2024, is what do we need to do to help to realize that vision that people had before us? Ooh. What do we need to do to make sure that we're still actively doing the work? Because just saying that we own this land, it means very little, right? Yeah. If you're not cultivating it, right? It means very little. I have a lot of younger cousins, and they're like, oh, well, our family said we want to build generational wealth. We want to have a space for, my grandson or my granddaughter to come to. But how can you have a space for them to come to if you're not taking them there now, right? So it is important for us to just, in my opinion, as we're talking about heirs property, is to realize that it is something that we've been given. It's a birthright. And that it's not just something that just sits there, but that there's active work that we have to do. And activating that work or activating those spaces is helping to realize that vision and the hopes of those who came before us. So, yeah.
That's a message. Now, remind me, do you all have land in Prince George's County?
No.
So
we did. And that's part of the dissertation.
Right. I can't listen. I need this dissertation to be a published piece. Okay, I really do. But it's because as you're speaking, I'm just like, well, damn. Like, all this my land. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because somebody I know down my lineage then own this, that, and you and your family, you and your sister specifically, 6 generations, being able to go back that
Yeah.
far and trace your lineage in Prince George's County, knowing that your family had land. Like, what? Like, how does, probably silly question, but how does that make you feel knowing that you were, like, that is your birthright?
Yeah.
Like, that land is your birthright.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll be like, that has been part of the challenge, right, of working on a dissertation. So, for the benefits of the audience, so I'm an urban planner. I worked for Prince George's County for many years. I worked in zoning. Working in zoning, that's a land use policy. And I also worked on the county's history. And often I was going to work and I'm looking at these things and I'm like, okay, what does it mean for me to come into a space? So my family's land in Prince George's County actually was lost through urban renewal. So what does it mean now for me to come into a space as a planner, working within the same organization, institution that had the very same hand at removing my family's land, right? And not just removing the land, but removing the land from family ownership and renaming the street, right? So I can go back and look at historic maps that show Harrod Street, right? So again, that idea of my third great grandfather was a farmer. His son was a farmer. His son was also a farmer, which is the lineage through which I'm a part of. So knowing that he purchased this property with the very specific intention of creating space for his children and his children's descendants, and because of urban renewal practices and this idea that Black people don't hold space, what is like racial economics. Black people don't hold space, or Black people aren't valued in space the same way. So there was a desire to push them out to make way for new development, right? So I think about that and I'm like, wow, it is somewhat traumatic.
Yeah.
But I do think then that's why the aspect of having joy, hope, and centering and finding ways to recenter on that is always really important when you're thinking about this work. Because it is, I mean, it's difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're working in heirs property or working in your genealogy, because you have to do that to a certain extent for heirs property, you're gonna find out some stuff,
Yeah.
right? And you have
Oh.
to be prepared for that process.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. When you speak about joy and holding on to joy, which is internal, right? Like, and we speak to like hope, which I'm just reminding myself all the time, and not even as it relates to family, land, heirs, property, life, because life's right. And it's like holding on to hope, having hope, and then finding that thing that just really, ignites joy internally. Like knowing what you have researched about your family, right? And living, working, playing, serving community, all those things. And maybe I'm naming those things. Like, what is the very thing that you, like, what is that hope that you hold on to? And
Yeah.
just knowing what you know about your history.
I mean,
And your work as an urban planner,
Yeah.
the history.
because the urban planning piece, that's the hard piece, right?
Yes.
But no, it's really been about family, right? And
like
what does
that.
it mean to preserve family and to preserve those connections, right? I mean, I do believe that when we think about family property or family land, to sit in that and I don't want to just keep bringing it up, but to reflect back and to say, okay, I am here, right? Let's say my family no longer owns that land in Prince George's County, right? That's not in family ownership. But how interesting, right? How unique is it that a family who own land in Prince George's County, a family who the grandfather served on the trustee board of the local school, how is it that his great granddaughter, right, said, I'm interested in land and space, right? Like, it's not just coincidental, right? So a part of me then centers on like, well, maybe, right, I have a certain, what did they say in that movie? I have a unique set of skills, right? It may not apply to anywhere else, right? But it is truly interesting that I just happen to have a unique set of skills and that I've been set up in a certain place and time. I feel like I'm preaching, oh my goodness. In a certain place and time to reveal this, right? And so I think then,
Gotta use your words. Use your words wisely. Your words have power. So it's about. So you're reframing. Like it's just.
and it's like, well, maybe this is my purpose, right? Who would have thought that, right? They may not have, but maybe they did, right? Maybe when I think about how my mother used to pass by the family land off of Sheriff Road in MLK, and she will always point out that's the land where your family owned, right? Maybe that's why, right? So there are all these little things. And so I think the thing that I try to hold on to is maybe this is my purpose, right? And it could be, challenging and think like, is this I don't want to call it the burden, but is this the plight, right? But I'm also then reminded that if this is my purpose, then there are different things that come into place, right? It's the reason why I work as an urban planner. It's the reason why I enjoy being in the dirt and being in the soil. Why I like to research, right? There's a specific set of skills that I have cultivated, or maybe that have also just been instilled upon me that have allowed me to see, like, all right, how do I fit in this? So
Everything in perspective. Everything in perspective. Oh my goodness, everything in perspective. You touched, you gave some examples of, some of the dynamics within your family as it comes to heirs property, right? Can you expound upon like some of other experiences with heirs property that have been challenging to navigate?
yeah, yeah. So I think so. I will say, like in the instance of my family, one of the things that's been, or at least on my dad's side, so because you figure all this land has now been divided up into like maybe 8 few pieces. Because I'll just focus on.
And this is in South
This is
Carolina.
the land in South Carolina.
Okay,
yeah.
got it.
So that's all been divided up into other small pieces. So they're all trying to figure out now, doing the same thing that we're doing, trying to figure out how to handle those.
Okay.
But I'll say on my father's side, they've organized themselves in a pretty interesting way, right?
Okay.
So at least they pay taxes, right? So they pay taxes on the
Okay.
land. Where in many instances, what happens sometimes with heirs properties, people don't know.
Yeah.
If you don't know the property exists, or if you don't have the money to pay for the taxes, that can be a huge challenge that you experience, is that you don't have the financial matters to then keep this land, right? And so Terry Yoso is an author, and they talk about different types of community cultural wealth and different types of community capitals that can support people in, particularly looked at Latino students in the university, but they applied to people of color or any marginalized group, that talk about these things that we have inherently, like these skills that help us like move around. And one of those things is like navigational capital. So navigational capital is this idea that you have the ability to move through bureaucratic systems. So luckily, right, for my family, they happen to have somebody who is an urban planner who knows how to read tax records, who knows how to do
it is.
archival record, right? So I can go through
Yeah.
all those things. So one of the first issues that I found out, so when we came together as a family and I said, hey, we need to do something with the family land, sat down, did a PowerPoint presentation with my family. I had my TV. I used my
I would
TV.
like to see this PowerPoint presentation if I can.
I'll send it to you. And I actually send it to other families now, right? And we went through the property, right? And I talked to them about some of these stats about why Black people have lost land, why they need to do something about it. If not, this land will be lost like to time forever. So one of the first things that I noted with our property, in every community in most jurisdictions will have something called, they'll have a digital map. And the digital map is basically a map that might show, it'll be a digital map and then also maybe a hard copy property map. And these maps will actually show where property, who owns what property. So in South Carolina, for instance, in the county that my family's from, it's a digital map that's online, and it shows this is, Mackey property. This is how many acres they own. This is when they last paid their tax records. This is the size of all those things. So one of the first things that I noted, and this is...
Pause really quickly. Is that a digital map that's through the county?
This in this instance, this was a digital map that was through the county.
Okay.
So
Okay.
every jurisdiction it will be different.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Because
most
I viewed a similar one
Yeah.
in Alabama when I was looking at some land that my grandmother used to own, and I was able to look at all the things. Yep.
So most land, and so most jurisdictions will have a similar map. Often it's going to be at the county level, depending on like the size. The size for DC, of course, is at the city level, right? But one of the first things I noted when I looked at the map is that they had 2 parcels of land, but one parcel was only showing like 5 acres, like a half an acre. It was wrong, right? And
Whoa.
so that then meant that these maps tend to be your maps from a technical perspective those are also serve as like legal. Those are also law, right? Those in some instances those can be binding. So if you go to court, you have heirs property, you have a map that's showing that's not reflecting accurate
Right.
property records. You don't have the people who may have initially been on the deed. It makes the situation more complicated. So one of the first things that I had to do was get on the phone with the people in South Carolina, calling them, writing letters to say, hey, sending emails. I need you all to update this map to reflect this. Here are deed records. Here's the quick claim deed that they signed. Here was the the original court papers to provide justification. And often what happens for families, if you don't have that
Documentation, I'm so glad you said that. That is so important. Not just the documentation piece, but I feel like, especially in some of these southern towns,
Exactly.
them records are all over the place, missing. I've had my grandmother, like, we've talked about like finding certain deeds. They don't got nothing.
It was a flood. It was a fire in the building.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it happens. And you have to then be responsible for making sure that you have access to those things. So we went through that process of getting it cleared up. So like now it reflects accurately on the map.
Good for y'all.
And it seems like it's something small, but
That's big.
it ends up being huge. And I'm like, if y'all were paying an attorney, you all would have been paying a lot of, which then also means it becomes prohibitive for other families who may not necessarily have the funds to continue with the property in their family ownership. I mean, it can get it's actually like, oh wow, it can be scary, and it can also happen like very quickly.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it can happen slowly because there's just just no real monitoring or anything.
What are some, like, because y'all were y'all the historians, so y'all got PowerPoint presentations, y'all got all the documents, but for someone who is maybe dealing, and here's the thing too, for some people, who have inherited property, they may not go through this. So this is not everybody's situation.
Right.
Let's just that's also name that too.
That's true, right?
Yeah,
so
but
please create a will.
Yeah, right. No, right. Yeah, right.
Create a will.
Well, that was going to be another one of my questions when you were speaking to earlier. Like, and again, I know like very surface level of like heirs property more now because of Brittney. But will a will solve? Is that like the problem solver? Like, is that the solution, or just like the start of like, y'all got this in place, so at least we know, who this property is going to go to specifically? Like what?
Yeah, so the will is just the starter, right? So the will just starts the conversation. I'll say wills can always be contested, right? But it's a good place to start in the conversation to then identify who has what, who will receive what, right?
Yeah.
Even if you're planning on sharing your property with all of your children or all your descendants, the will still sets out a general framework that at least guides some initial conversations. But ultimately, one of the challenges that we also experienced in our family was going through probate. And probate, then it becomes like the actual execution of that will, right? Which also costs money, right? So, or if you don't have a will, you still have to go through probate, but there's just other ways that has to happen. So that then can also become the headache. So what we ended up running into on my dad's family is that I convinced them. So the process was first, I had to sit down and actually convince them that working on this together was something that they wanted to do. I also noticed that they were paying maybe like $3,000 to $4,000 in property taxes a year.
Oh my.
It was actually relatively expensive
Oh, my.
in property taxes a year. But if they had converted their land over to agricultural land, they would have only been paying like $250 to $300, right?
Ah, okay.
So
okay.
now we're talking about you're paying $3,000 in property taxes over the course of 20 years. Now we're talking about that's $60,000,
That's
right?
significant. Yeah.
That's money that can be reinvested into something
Yes.
on the property, not including if you were using it for agriculture purposes, whether it be for timber, whether it be for growing, whether it's just a meadow, you might still then be able to generate some additional funds from that to support whatever operations you want to do as a family. So where we ended up getting, so first I had to convince them, like, look, this is something y'all want to work towards. Then we sat down, we invited in the Prince George's County, like the director of the Register of Wills, to actually talk to the family about what is probate.
Y'all were not playing.
No, we weren't. We were like my sister, I have a red folder that includes all of the material, right? About, okay, this is the process. This is how you start a will. This is like a trust. This is what you could do. Then, I want to shout out an organization in South Carolina that was really helpful. It's called the Center for Heirs Property Preservation in South Carolina.
Oh, okay.
And we actually reached out to them. It's an organization that was specifically started in the state of South Carolina to support Black families and families who owned what was identified as heirs property. Initially, they were very concerned with land loss around the coast of South Carolina.
Okay.
Like the
Yeah.
low coast in South Carolina. And so we reached out to them. They connected us with an attorney. They let us talk. And this is pro bono.
Pro bono.
Yes.
Won't
Right.
he do it? Won't he do
Exactly.
it?
So they let us talk about it, talk to us, and they said, okay, well, this is where you all need to do is probate. So essentially, my uncle that passed away about 10 years ago, his estate, because at the time, this is the other part, they did not believe he owned anything, right? My uncle was a Vietnam War veteran, right? Had his challenges in life. And so they're like, okay, Ernest passes away, right? We bury him, we do what we have to do to pay our respects. But nobody thought, oh, this land that Ernest is an heir to, and that his name is, that now he's an owner, which requires them to probate his estate. So that's where, I wish it was like a better story, right? But that's where we are, right? It's it's the state of having to go through now and probate my Uncle Ernest's estate. And COVID happened. And so we're basically like, we need to probate, actually, I think his estate very quickly, or at least try to go through the administrative process. Because if it's not through an administrative process, then you have to probate through court, which again might require attorney fees and can be very costly.
Let's just breathe for a moment.
Yeah.
Good work, though. And just grateful to God for giving you all the strength just to press. Because I know this is on top of, this is your job. I was on top of your job, but this is your job,
Yeah.
right? So... And let me just a disclaimer, y'all. We are not giving any. I'm not a lawyer. Brittney not a lawyer. This is no legal advice. We are sharing personal experiences. Please seek a professional if you're having some, challenges with heirs property. I just want to name that, right? You named, some resources indirectly, but for someone who maybe mitigating challenges with heirs property, like what are just some of like the top resources, like the go-tos that someone could just like go to immediately as a starting point?
Yeah. So I'd say one of the first places is, again, the Center for Heirs Property Preservation. Even though they're South Carolina based, they will do an intake with you. They're probably like, if this girl do not stop saying this. They will do an intake with you, right? They will tell you that they can't help you, but they will do an intake and at least help you think about what's
through
happening.
some things. Okay.
I listed the Black Belt Justice Center. I think
Yes.
it's also,
Shout out Black Belt. Yes.
it's also another great resource. And then the USDA surprisingly has a lot of information posted on their website and posted articles and journals and actually some toolkits around heirs property as well. If you look at, I think it's farmer.gov. In the 2018 Farm Bill, there were actually a lot of provisions passed to better support individuals who own heirs properties or who have right to heirs property. So that's also been some important things that have also,
Okay.
happened as well. So that looks at everything from if you have an heirs property or you have a conflicted title, conflicted deed to property, maybe you can apply for a farm number now to help
Okay.
assist with that.
When are we gonna get this virtual course on?
Well, once
I love to, think of a product.
let's see. No, so I mean, I would say like with the capital market, we do workshops similar to this. And so
Okay.
now I think I might be like, all right,
Okay,
let's
I
figure
did
this
not
out.
know that.
So-
That's awesome.
So we actually have done like some healthy food community walk audits, where we really try to connect food and the built environment and help people understand like what those connections are. So with the healthy food walk audit, we actually take residents. We did 9 last year, where we take residents and we identify either healthy food options, unhealthy food options, and we let's walk it. Right? What do the streets look like? What do the sidewalks look like? Is the infrastructure good? Do your
Right.
crosswalks work? Are your crossing signals activated? Are people speeding? Is it pollution?
That racial equity lens, y'all.
Exactly. And then we take pictures and we actually build out a story map. So we talk to people and teach them around things like that. So we'll probably roll out something.
Yes. Oh my goodness. What? I feel like we can have part 2, part 3, part 4 of Heirs
I
Property.
can sit here and talk to you all
this.
day.
I can sit here and talk to you all day, Miss Brittney. Seriously.
All day. Look, I'll just keep going and going.
I love it. I absolutely love it. What is a golden nugget you want to leave us with when it comes to Heirs Property as it relates to either your personal experience or just something motivational for someone else who may be listening to this? They feel a bit defeated, they feel maybe overwhelmed, don't know where to start. What could be that North Star for them? And that could just be Brittney love a quote, y'all. She was quoting me down before we started the show. I absolutely love it. A quote, a book, something, because even in my just very short experience with dealing with my family when it came to land, I was just like, I don't even have time for this drama. It was just literally you know what? I got a million other things to do. And I honestly, I felt real. My feelings were really hurt. I was scared to even tell my family that my feelings were hurt. I won't even go into the experience when I was actually sitting in the trailer with my cousin and I was literally just about to cry because I just kind of felt again, some things had happened, but this can be a very as you know, very daunting and just can be dark. But what is that North Star, that, brim of light look like for?
Yeah. So first, I'm sorry that you had to go through that
Yeah.
because sometimes the process it it's it doesn't
need have to be that
right?
way.
Not at all.
Yeah.
But I think people are always so they're afraid, right? There's this fear that permeates through people, and then they want to radiate it off or share it off to others, and it's it doesn't have to be like that. So I would say during this process, I actually felt at one point why am I doing this? It was so here I am, a PhD candidate studying land systems, right? I'm a certified urban planner. Means I had to take a test, right? I had to take a test. And I had my family members you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, what?
Oh no. They didn't say that to you, Brittney.
I was like,
no.
what? And I was like, so the thing that I said to myself was, God bless a child that has his own. And you could take it in many ways. But one way is when I think about and I reflect on the legacy that those who came before me wanted to leave, it was really this is our own, right?
Yeah.
This is something that we own in a place and time. When I think about my third great grandfather in Prince George's County, or I think about my grandfather or my great grandfather in South Carolina, when they were dealing with being property themselves, right? They're now I am able to own this, right? So there's a blessing in that. For me, I had to say at one point, God bless the child that has their own or has her own for myself, because as much as I may have been fighting we weren't fighting, but trying to get this forward momentum from my family to actually get us to like, let's get this done. I realized and I said, well, this is not mine, right? Like at this point, it's not my legacy to leave, right? So as much as I may want to leave that, it's not mine. And so my charge to myself had to be, what legacy do I want to cultivate and leave, right? Because that's theirs, right?
Yeah.
And they have the right to do with it what they will. And at that point, I was like, okay, if this works out, it works. But I'm also going to find time to invest in my legacy, just like those who did before me.
Absolutely. I don't even know what else to say after that, y'all. I do not. Brittney, I seriously look up to you.
Oh, thank
I
you.
really do. I like hold you in the highest regards. Every time I
Appreciate
talk about,
that.
even though it's been, Brittney was at my little kickback, at a homegrown
We was having
kickback.
fun.
We had fun at the Line DC up on the rooftop. It was so great to reconnect with some of the folks I've had, some of the OGs I've had on the show. Again, Brittney's episode number 35. But I just appreciate your wisdom
Thank you.
and your words. And thank you for giving us like this crash course, if you will, of heirs property. But just a reminder of our birthright. What is our birthright? And a reminder of, those who came before us, what they worked for, and reminding us too that, you just said it, like focusing on our legacy, being reminded of the work that they did, standing on their shoulders, but also tapping into our own legacy, and just reminding us of the history. Yes, there's heirs property, but just how the land in this country was set up, and I'm just appreciative of your words and all of, you educated us today. I'll say that. You educated us.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you. And look, I'm ready to get these archives going. Okay. We're going to have 157.
Yeah.
That's a lot. The archives, and we're going to I want to see it.
Yes.
I see it already.
I know you
right?
do.
I see it already.
Brittney, I have to say this before we close out. When we were at our little, party, shindig, Brittney, she comes up to me. She says, you're brilliant, right? And I'm like, am I? She was like, no, you're really brilliant. It's very hard for me to hear things about it. Really is. And I'm like, thank you. And she said, you're like this archivist. I got to connect you. She was like, do you write? And I was like, write what, Brittney? I write notes, to-do lists. Like, do I write? I said, no. She was like, no, do you write after each of your episodes to reflect? And I'm like, no, I don't. And I just feel like Brittney, every moment that I've had with Brittney has been so enlightening. And I'm like, now I'm bringing a journal with me to every
That's
episode
right.
that I do.
Look, I got to find my journal too now.
I'll be writing on my Uber back home and be like, and this is what came out of this conversation. And by the way, I need you to send me those quotes that you,
Yeah, I'll share.
But anyway, this has been a pleasure. I hope that you have learned a lot. For those who might be dealing with heirs property, if it's gone a smooth process, awesome. Also, each one teach one, as well. So if you have some answers, if you can be supportive, please do that. But if you are dealing with some complexities with heirs property, we hope that, this conversation was a bit enlightening, and just know that you aren't in it by yourself, So, but at any rate, thank y'all for tuning in. And until next time, peace. Thanks for tuning in. You can catch today's episode on iTunes, Spotify, and Simplecast. And be sure to follow us at Food Talks in Color, that's just the letter N, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.